Hi, I'm Daniel. Do you know what it feels like to spend 6 years building a home only to be told, serve my other son or get out? That's what my father said to me, before handing my house to my half-brother and calling him my son, while I was reduced to just you. I walked away without a fight. But a week later, my phone lit up with 72 missed calls, and the truth that would bring them all to their knees. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. And stay with me, because what I uncovered next, it changed everything. I pulled into the driveway just as the wind picked up, tossing a few early spring leaves against my car. It had been a long day at work, but that familiar two-story house, my house, was supposed to be my refuge. I'd built my life around it, put 6 years of my sweat and every spare dollar into it, from replacing the roof myself to pulling weekend double shifts so I could make the payments. But as I parked, I noticed something that hit me in the gut. My father's old sedan was parked squarely in the main spot, the one I'd always used. Inside, the air felt different. I took a few steps into the living room, and the first thing I noticed was the clutter. A gym bag in the corner, an unfamiliar pair of sneakers by the door, a gaming console hooked up to the TV. Then my eyes landed on the pictures, frames I'd bought and hung, now showcasing my half-brother Michael's smiling face. Not one of me in sight. The wall that had once felt like mine had been rewritten. "Come in here," my father called from the living room, his voice carrying that heavy authority I knew all too well. I walked in, feeling the weight of the house pressing on me. He sat in his usual recliner, one leg crossed over the other, looking as though he owned every square inch. Michael lounged on the couch, his shoes kicked off like he'd been living there for years, not days. My father didn't waste time. "You've done enough here," he said flatly. "This is Michael's home now. Either you serve him, help him get settled and support him, or you pack your things and go." There it was. No sugarcoating, no pretense of fairness. Serve him? Like I was some sort of unpaid caretaker in my own home. He didn't even say my name. To him, I wasn't his daughter anymore. I was just you. But Michael? He got the honor of being my son. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but the words stayed lodged there. My father's eyes didn't waver. He wasn't bluffing, and he wasn't inviting discussion. It was a decree. I looked at Michael. He smirked, leaning back as if to say, "See, I win." It was the kind of look that made me want to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled. A small, quiet smile that wasn't for them. It was for me. Without a word, I turned and walked upstairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. I opened my bedroom door, the one place in this house that had felt safe, and took in the sight of my things. I ran my fingers across the dresser I'd bought on clearance, the curtains I'd hemmed myself, the bed I'd crashed in after too many exhausting days. This was my life, reduced to a handful of belongings in a house that was no longer mine. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet and began folding clothes methodically, one piece at a time. I moved slowly, not because I doubted my decision, but because I wanted to remember this moment, the moment I chose myself over the scraps they offered. When I picked up the house key from the nightstand, I paused. That little piece of metal had once been my symbol of independence. Now, it just felt like a reminder of how disposable I was in their eyes. Downstairs, I could hear muffled voices, my father talking to Michael about plans for the weekend, like I'd already been erased. I zipped the suitcase, took one last look around, and walked out. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't slam the door. I just walked past them, suitcase in hand, my silence louder than any argument I could have made. My father didn't stop me. Michael didn't bother to look up. Outside, the air was cold, but it felt cleaner than inside that house. As I slid into my car and started the engine, I whispered to myself, "If I'm just you to them, they'll learn what that means." I drove away slowly, watching the house shrink in the rearview mirror. It wasn't mine anymore, not really. But as I turned my phone on the next morning, I didn't expect what was waiting. 15 missed calls from my father, and that was just the beginning. By the third day, that number grew to 72, and I knew they weren't calling to apologize. I stared at my phone on the small kitchen counter of my new apartment, watching it light up every few minutes, then fall silent again. It was unnerving, the persistence, the tone of their messages. My father wasn't the kind of man to call repeatedly unless something was wrong. That alone was enough to make me stop and wonder, what could possibly push him to reach out like this? My new place smelled faintly of fresh paint and stale carpet. It wasn't home. It wasn't anything close to the 2-story house I'd poured my life into, but it was mine, even if just for now. A 1-bedroom on the other side of town, quiet and almost too still. But I had a bed, a roof, and no one breathing down my neck with ultimatums. For the first time in years, I didn't have to answer to anyone. I leaned back on the worn couch, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator, and let myself breathe. But that peace didn't last. Day 1, I'd ignored 15 missed calls. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe my father had second thoughts or Michael wanted to rub salt in the wound. By day 3, there were 72 missed calls, dozens of texts, even a few voicemails. My phone was full of them, all uncharacteristically desperate. "Call me back. It's urgent. We need to talk. This isn't a request." One from Michael. "You can't just walk away from this. Call Dad." I deleted them without listening further. I didn't owe them my time. Not after everything. That night, I sat at the small table by the window, scrolling through my phone, deleting one message after another, but with each swipe, my hands shook more. I hated that they could still do this to me, get under my skin even from miles away. The next afternoon, my phone rang again, but this time it was a familiar voice from the past. Mrs. Harrison, the neighbor across the street from my old house. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Oh, Madeline?" she said, sounding surprised. I thought this was still your house line. I just wanted to check in. You know, after everything that happened." I froze. Everything that happened? There was a pause on her end, and I could hear her regret before she even spoke. "I shouldn't have said that. Forget I called." Her tone shifted sharply. "I need to go." "Wait. What did you mean?" But she hung up before I could press her. I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear long after the line went dead, my mind spinning. What did they do? Her words echoed, bouncing around my head, louder than the hum of the appliances or the occasional creak of the old apartment walls. That night, I found myself reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out the house key I hadn't been able to let go of. The metal was cold against my skin, grounding me, but also reminding me of what I'd lost. Not just a home, but dignity, family, the sense of belonging I'd fought for. 6 years of sacrifice reduced to nothing. I placed the key on the table, staring at it under the dim kitchen light. Whatever had happened in that house, I needed to know. Not because I cared about them, I'd made peace with walking away, but because I couldn't stand the idea of them destroying everything I'd built and walking away unscathed. That night, I decided I'd stop deleting their messages. If they wanted my attention so badly, they were about to get it, but not the way they thought. And by morning, I had a plan. And the first step was walking back into the house I paid for, uninvited. I drove slowly, almost deliberately, through streets I could navigate with my eyes closed. Every turn felt heavier than the last. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, the same way I used to grip a hammer or a paintbrush when I was fixing that house. I remembered the late nights after work, scraping walls, saving every spare dollar to make that place ours. Or at least, I thought it was ours. My father had made it clear. It was Michael's home now. Still, no matter how many times they tried to erase me, they couldn't. My name was still on that deed. When I pulled into the driveway, my chest tightened. The place didn't feel like mine anymore. There was a "for sale" sign leaning against the wall by the front steps, waiting to be planted. The audacity of it nearly knocked the air out of me. I sat in my car for a moment, staring, before I grabbed the old house key I'd kept in my jacket pocket and walked up to the front door. The lock turned as if nothing had changed, but everything inside had. The living room felt like a stranger's space. Sparse furniture, staged decor, a vase of fresh lilies on the counter. They'd painted over the walls I'd spent weekends perfecting, covered the scuff marks that told the story of my life there. I walked in further, my footsteps echoing against the emptiness, and saw the faint smell of new paint mixed with something sour. Betrayal. I didn't hear them until they were in the doorway. My father's voice cut through the air. "You had no right to come back here." I turned slowly to face him. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of his own schemes had pressed him down. "No right?" I said, my voice calm but shaking underneath. "I'm still on the deed. Or did you forget?" His face dropped just enough for me to know I'd hit a nerve. Michael, of course, tried to fill the silence. He sauntered in behind my father, his smirk as smug as ever. "We don't need you anymore," he said, arms folded. "We almost closed without you." I took my phone out of my pocket, unlocked it, and held it up like evidence in a courtroom. "Almost. But then the title company realized you don't get to sell a house that isn't yours alone." I scrolled to the email I'd been staring at all night, forwarded from my old address. "Sale cannot proceed without all deed owners present." Guess who that means? Their faces went pale in unison. For once, neither of them had a comeback. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and raw. My father looked like he wanted to speak, but the words didn't come. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his earlier arrogance slipping fast. I didn't stay to enjoy it. Instead, I pocketed my phone and walked deeper into the house, running my fingers along the walls. Every inch of that place had a piece of me in it. My blood, sweat, and dreams lived here, even if they'd tried to scrub them out with fresh paint and cheap flowers. I turned back to them just once. "You wanted me gone," I said, my voice low. "But you couldn't erase me. This house isn't yours to sell, and you both know it." I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out as slowly as I'd come in, the cool air hitting me like a rebirth. This time I didn't leave defeated. I left knowing I had the upper hand, and by the way they watched me go, they knew it too. By the next morning, I knew exactly how to make them pay for what they'd tried to do. The sun was breaking through the blinds when I finally sat up, though I'd barely slept. My temporary apartment felt suffocating, not because of its size, but because of everything churning in my head. I had replayed every moment from the day before. My father's face dropping when I reminded him I was still on the deed, Michael's smugness crumbling when I showed them the email. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to believe I was replaceable. But they'd underestimated me. And that was their first mistake. I made coffee, the cheap kind I'd picked up at the corner store, and sat at the tiny kitchen table with my laptop. 6 years. 6 years of grinding at work, turning down vacations, saying next time to friends who asked me out, all so I could build stability for a family who never thought I deserved to stand on equal ground. They treated me like a servant, I muttered under my breath, but I was the one who kept the roof over their heads. Saying it out loud stung, but it gave me clarity. I pulled up a contact my coworker had given me months ago when I first mentioned family disputes over property, a real estate attorney. At the time, I'd brushed it off. Back then, I still believed my father wouldn't cross certain lines. Now I knew better. The receptionist connected me, and within 20 minutes, I was explaining everything to a calm, deliberate voice on the other end. After listening, the lawyer asked for details about the house. When I told him I was a co-owner, he paused. "Do you know your ownership percentage?" 50, I said automatically. He chuckled softly. Are you sure about that? Because from what you've described, it sounds like there might be more. Pull your original purchase documents and check if there's a trust attached to the property. The word trust stopped me cold. I had never been told about a trust. My stomach tightened. I'll look, I said. When we hung up, I spent the next hour digging through a stack of boxes I'd thrown together when I left the house. Old bills, tax forms, photos. Then I found it. A large sealed envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. My heart stopped. I sat on the floor for a long moment, staring at her familiar looping script. For you. Keep it safe. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a trust document, notarized and official. My late mother had left me controlling interest in the property, 70%. I blinked at the number like it couldn't possibly be real. All those years of my father treating me like I was just an extra pair of hands, all those cold looks and dismissive words. He knew this existed. He hid it. My throat tightened as I remembered the last conversation I'd had with my mother in the hospital. I want you to always have a home, she'd said, her voice weak but certain, and he took that promise and buried it because it didn't serve him. The grief hit me hard and fast, like someone had yanked me back in time to that sterile hospital room. I sat there in silence, letting it roll over me, but only for a moment. Then I wiped my face and stood. I scanned the document again, every line now a weapon in my hands. My father and Michael thought they had me cornered, but this wasn't just leverage. This was ownership. I printed copies of the trust and the deed. I organized everything in a folder, neat and deliberate. It felt almost therapeutic, taking control piece by piece. By the time the sun set, I had everything I needed. They thought I was just the one who signed checks and kept quiet. They were about to find out I knew every rule, and I was done playing nice. But first, I had to look my father in the eye and let him know the game had changed. The drive back to the house felt longer than it had any right to. I knew every bump in that road, every leaning mailbox, but this time my stomach twisted with every passing landmark. I parked a block away, not because I had to, but because I wanted time to breathe before walking into the lion's den. The evening light made the street look washed out, pale, like the house itself had been drained of life since I left. When I reached the front door, I didn't knock. My key still fit, though part of me half expected they'd had the locks changed. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Fresh paint, as if they'd tried to scrub me out with primer and new colors. My brother's things were everywhere. His jacket over the banister, his shoes kicked off in the hallway. It was like he'd moved in completely, staking a claim on ground he didn't earn. They wanted me erased, I thought. But you can't erase someone who built the foundation. I walked into the living room. The walls were filled with framed photos of them. My father at barbecues, Michael grinning like he owned the world, not one of me. The moment my mother passed, it was like they'd rewritten the family album and cut me out entirely. My father was sitting at the dining table, a glass of whiskey in hand. He didn't look surprised to see me, but there was a tension in his shoulders. Michael sprawled on the couch, scrolling on his phone like he couldn't be bothered. Well, my father said coolly, look who decided to come back. I stayed by the doorway, hands in my pockets. Don't act like you didn't want me here. You've been calling me non-stop. His jaw tightened. We needed to talk. This could have been civil if you'd answered the phone. Michael snorted without looking up. You're making this harder than it needs to be. This is going to be my home. You dragging it out just makes you look pathetic. The smugness in his voice almost made me laugh. Almost. I walked slowly to the table and sat across from my father, pulling a folded document from my jacket pocket. You two forgot something, I said, sliding it toward him. His hand hovered over the paper for a moment before he picked it up. His eyes flickered as he read. but he quickly masked it with that same cold stare he'd always used to put me in my place. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It was left for me," I said. "By Mom. Which is funny because you've known about it all along. Didn't think I'd find it, did you?" Michael glanced up now, frowning. "What is it?" "None of your business," my father snapped. But the damage was done. Michael was curious, leaning forward like a kid trying to sneak a look at his test score. I leaned back, letting the silence do the work. "Mom didn't want me out of this house. She made sure of it." "You can try all you want, but you can't erase me, legally or otherwise." My father's composure cracked, just slightly, a tightness around his mouth, a flash of something behind his eyes. It was the first real reaction I'd seen from him in years. Michael, either oblivious or overconfident, laughed. "You think a piece of paper changes anything? This is my future home. You're just holding on to it because you can't move on." I looked at him, at his smug face, at his hands gripping the couch like he was bracing for a fight he couldn't win. My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice level. "You don't know how wrong you are." For a long moment, no one said anything. The weight of the document on the table did all the talking for me. Finally, I stood. "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice calm but final. "And if either of you try to move forward without me, you'll regret it." I walked toward the door, feeling their eyes on my back. The silence as I left said more than any argument could have. For the first time, they knew I wasn't playing their game anymore. But their next move... It was far worse than I expected. I was sitting at the small table in my apartment, staring at the stack of documents I'd gathered over the past week. The deed, the trust, the lawyer's notes. When my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Is this... you?" a soft voice asked, hesitant. It was Aunt Lorraine. We hadn't spoken in years, not since my mother's funeral. "Yes, it's me." "What's going on?" She sighed heavily, the kind of sigh that comes from someone who doesn't want to be the messenger. "They're holding a family meeting. At the community center. Your father, Michael. They've invited half the relatives, even some of the neighbors. They're talking about you." My grip on the phone tightened. "Talking about me how?" "They're calling you ungrateful, saying you've turned against the family, that you're trying to take what isn't yours." I stayed silent, letting her words sink in. "You need to know what they're saying," she added quickly. "You deserve to hear it for yourself." I thanked her and hung up. My chest burned, but not from hurt, from a bitter, growing resolve. They wanted to drag me through the mud in front of everyone. Fine, let them. An hour later, I was pulling into the parking lot of the community center. Cars lined the spaces, more than I expected. Word had traveled fast. As I walked inside, I felt the eyes on me. Relatives I hadn't seen in years, old neighbors who used to wave at me when I mowed the lawn. Now they looked at me like I was something they'd scrape off their shoe. Whispers trailed me. "That's the one. Imagine fighting your own father over a house. Greedy. Always was." I kept walking, head high, though every word lodged in my spine like a splinter. The meeting room was packed. At the front, my father stood behind a folding table, Michael next to him like a proud heir. My father's voice carried across the room as I slipped in through the back. "Family isn't about legal documents or percentages," he declared, his tone solemn, rehearsed. "It's about loyalty, respect, and some people here have forgotten that. Some people would rather hold this family hostage over money than do what's right." Murmurs of agreement rose around the room. My throat tightened, but I didn't move. Michael stepped forward, his hands in his pockets, his smirk infuriatingly casual. "He doesn't even care about Dad," he said, scanning the room like he was delivering a sermon. "It's all about the money for him. Always has been." I felt my nails digging into my palms. They wanted to humiliate me, turn me into the villain of their little play. Then my father delivered the final blow. "As of today," he announced, "this house, my house, belongs to my real son, Michael. The other one, well, he made his choice when he walked away." Gasps erupted. Some clapped. Others just stared at me, wide-eyed, like they couldn't believe the scene unfolding. I didn't speak. Not one word. My silence was louder than anything I could have said. I let their cheers wash over me, their fake moral high ground. I didn't need to defend myself. Not here. When my father's gaze met mine across the room, I simply turned and walked out. The cool afternoon air hit my face like a slap, but it was grounding. I made it to my car, started the engine, and just sat there for a minute, staring at the steering wheel. They think they've won, I thought. They think they've shamed me into disappearing. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the app I'd used out of instinct the moment I walked in. Every word, every lie, every boast, recorded. They thought they'd humiliated me into silence. They had no idea I'd been recording every word. And that recording, it was about to change everything. That night, I sat in the dark, only the soft hum of my fridge filling the silence. My phone was on the table, the recording from that so-called family meeting playing through cheap earbuds, hearing their voices over and over again, my father's grandstanding, Michael's smug comments. It burned me, but it also fueled me. They used my sacrifices as a prop to crown him their hero, I whispered to myself. They didn't know it yet, but they had just handed me the leverage I needed. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. My mother's words echoed in my head, something she'd said long before she passed. If you want to protect what's yours, you do it with facts, not fists. That was her. Always calm, always strategic. Maybe it was time I finally listened. The next morning, after another night of little sleep, I scrolled through my contacts until I found Marla's number. She'd been a friend for years, someone who knew me before all this mess. More importantly, she worked as a paralegal. I hadn't talked to her in months, but when she picked up, her voice was warm. "I was hoping you'd call," she said after I explained everything in a few sentences. "Meet me at the diner tonight. Bring everything you've got. Paperwork, receipts, recordings. We'll sort through this." By evening, I was sitting in a corner booth of a small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the servers know your coffee order by heart. Marla walked in, her tote bag slung over her shoulder, and slid into the seat across from me. "You look tired," she said, not unkindly. "Feels like tired's become my default," I replied. I laid everything on the table. Old mortgage statements, bank transfers, the trust document, the deed copies. She scanned through them quickly, her brows furrowing deeper with each page. When I played her the recording of the meeting, she shook her head slowly. "They've built their entire argument on lies," she said finally. "And they slipped up. Big time." I leaned forward. "How bad is it?" "Bad for them, good for you," she said, flipping through the documents. "They claimed that house belongs to Michael now. That's not just wrong, it's legally impossible. You own 70%. They can't do anything without your signature." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "They bragged about transferring ownership, said it was already done." She paused, looking at me intently. "Then they forged your name. That's not just a lie. That's a felony." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Forged my name. My father and brother had gone that far, willing to commit a crime to erase me. Anger flared in my chest, but underneath it was something sharper, clarity. "What do I do?" I finally asked. "You stop reacting and start acting," Marla said firmly. "You've got receipts proving you paid for that house. You've got a trust from your mother giving you controlling interest. And now you've got a recording of them admitting to this circus. You hold every card, so play them." I sat back, processing her words. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine, it was about exposing what they were willing to do to take it from me. By the time the waitress refilled our coffee and Marla packed up the documents into neat folders, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: control. When I got back to my apartment, I printed duplicates of every document and stored them in separate envelopes. I backed up the recordings to a flash drive. My next moves weren't going to be emotional. They were going to be deliberate. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to beg. By the time they realized I wasn't broken, it would be too late to undo what I'd set in motion. And the first step? Walking back into that house. Not as their son, but as the man who owned everything they stood on. The drive there felt different this time. No shaking hands, no knot in my stomach, just a cold, focused clarity. The same house I'd built with my own sweat now stood like a battleground waiting for me. I parked across the street and watched for a moment. Lights glowed warmly through the windows. Laughter carried faintly into the night air. They were celebrating, probably still basking in their fantasy of a stolen victory. I walked up the driveway slowly, deliberately. I didn't bother knocking. This was my house. The key slid into the lock as easily as it had for years, and when I pushed the door open, the sound of their chatter died instantly. Every face turned toward me. My father stood at the head of the table, a glass raised. My brother sat smugly at his right, flanked by cousins and a few neighbors. Plates of food were scattered across the table like some kind of feast. My father's voice broke the silence first. "You have no right to be here." I closed the door behind me and held up a manila folder. "Funny, that's exactly what this paper says about all of you." He frowned, but I didn't give him a chance to respond. I stepped into the dining room and took in the scene. Michael's jacket hung over the chair my mother used to sit in. Her photos, which I hadn't seen in years, were gone from the walls. Everything had been rearranged to erase me, to make room for him. 6 years, I said quietly, letting my words cut through the stillness. 6 years of my life in every brick, every shingle, every dime that kept this place standing, and you reduced me to you. Michael leaned back, his smirk widening. "Are you done with the guilt trip? Because we're kind of in the middle of celebrating. My future home, you know." That word, my, burned hotter than I expected. But I didn't take the bait. I opened the folder, pulled out the stack of documents, and laid them on the table one by one. Bank statements, mortgage receipts, the trust my mother had left me, and finally, my phone, playing the recording of their little community performance. Every dollar that paid for this place, mine, every legal document, has my name, and you, I pointed at Michael, tried to erase me with a forged transfer. That's not just betrayal, it's a felony. A few relatives gasped. My father's hand, still holding his glass, trembled slightly. "You don't understand," he started, but his voice faltered. I cut him off. "No, you don't understand. I don't care about your justifications anymore. This," I gestured to the table, the house, all of it, "ends tonight." I walked over to my aunt, who sat closest to the door, and handed her copies of everything. "If anything happens to me, if I suddenly disappear again, these go straight to the authorities." "Try me." The room stayed silent. Even Michael had lost his grin. I turned toward the door, my steps slow and measured. "Enjoy the meal," I said, without looking back. "It's the last dinner you'll ever have in my house." And for the first time in years, they looked at me, not as you, but as the man who had the power to end them. But I wasn't done. Taking back my house was one thing. Making them face what they'd become, that was next. The next few days were oddly quiet on my end, but my phone was anything but. The 72 missed calls had piled up, and then some. My father, Michael, even a few distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. They all had something to say now. Funny how people find their voices when their lies stop working. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I kept replaying the recording of that family meeting, not out of pain anymore, but as a reminder of how far they were willing to go. Every insult, every twisted story they told to turn me into the villain, it was all there, preserved in cold, hard audio. By Thursday evening, I heard the knock on my apartment door. It wasn't a timid tap. It was the kind of knock that announces itself, that says, "You're going to answer me whether you like it or not." I opened the door to see my father standing there. He looked smaller somehow, not in stature but in presence. His shoulders hunched, his face creased deeper than I remembered. "We went too far," he said without preamble. No hello, no small talk, just straight to the plea. "Don't destroy the family over this. We can work this out." I let the silence hang between us. He hated silence. It left him exposed. "You destroyed it," I finally said, "the day you called me you, and handed my life's work to him." He flinched, and for a moment I almost felt a twinge of pity. Almost. "You don't understand." "No," I cut in. "I understand perfectly. You chose Michael. You always have. But you don't get to steal from me and still call it family." His mouth opened and closed like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. That was new. My father, speechless. I stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter, but I kept my voice firm. "This will be quick. You will vacate my house. You will return what's mine. And if you even think about trying to forge another document, I promise you the authorities will take it from here. This isn't a negotiation. This is me drawing a line." He stared at me for a long moment. I could almost see the fight drain out of him. Without another word, he nodded and left. Later that night, I sat on the floor of my living room, staring at the old suitcase I'd packed the day I left. It was still sitting where I'd dropped it that first night in this apartment. Back then, it had been my escape plan. Now, it was just luggage, soon to be unpacked in my reclaimed space. On Saturday morning, I drove back to the house. This time, it wasn't a confrontation. It was closure. When I walked through the door, the rooms were empty. No laughter, no decorations celebrating Michael's ownership, just bare walls and quiet echoes. I took my time walking through each room. The kitchen where I'd spent countless nights making cheap dinners, the living room where I'd fallen asleep after long work days, my mother's old garden outside, now overgrown, but still hers in spirit. They had tried to erase me here, but every corner still held my fingerprints. There were no revenge speeches, no dramatic confrontations. Just me, alone in my house, breathing in the silence. They wanted me gone. Now they were the ones leaving. And as I stood in the doorway, suitcase by my side, I realized something important. I didn't hate them. I didn't need to. I just didn't belong to them anymore. Sometimes you don't win by making them kneel. You win by standing, walking away, and never looking back.